In the dry darkness of Qumran cave, 4 fragments of parchment survived for nearly 2 millennia. Among them were Aramaic copies of writings now preserved in the Book of Enoch. Their existence creates in tension this work circulated among Jews before Christianity. Yet its geography describes regions no archaeologist has identified. And the title's central claim is partly true, in a specific sense. Enoch describes a cosmic landscape reached through guided journeys, with places associated with humans, the dead, angels, and the boundaries of creation. In 1 Enoch 17 through 19, Enoch is carried through regions of fire, darkness, mountains, waters, and the ends of the earth. Later, chapter 22 describes hollow places in a mountain where spirits of the dead await judgment. The text presents these locations as real within the vision. But does it reveal a route a human could follow? The evidence becomes more difficult here. Enoch does not discover a concealed country beyond a known border. His access depends on angelic guides, and the geography shifts between earthly imagery and cosmic architecture. 3 details matter what ends of the earth meant to an ancient writer, whether this route is geographical or visionary, and why Enoch is permitted to cross boundaries other humans cannot. The fragments establish the antiquity of the tradition. They do not prove this landscape exists. Yet the surviving account preserves something more precise than a vague legend: entrances, thresholds, and forbidden regions. So what kind of map was Enoch's audience meant to imagine? That map survives only because the Book of Enoch traveled through several languages and manuscript traditions. The complete work is preserved in Ge'ez, the classical language of Ethiopia, where First Enoch remained part of the biblical tradition of the Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church. But the discovery at Qumran pushed the textual history much further back. In Cave 4, scholars identified multiple Aramaic manuscripts of Enochic material, including fragments cataloged as 4 Q2014, Q2024, Q204, 4, Q2054, Q2064, Q207, and 4 Q212. Their dates fall broadly within the last centuries before the Common Era. That matters because the strange geography was not a medieval invention attached to Enoch centuries later. Versions of these traditions were already circulating in Second Temple Judaism. The surviving evidence is uneven. No single Qumran manuscript preserves the entire Book of Enoch, and damaged fragments cannot supply every line found in the later Ethiopic text. Greek witnesses also survive in partial form, including portions discovered at Akhmim in Egypt, while quotations and excerpts appear in other Greek transmission. Textual comparison shows that First Enoch is not a single composition written at one moment. It is a collection of distinct sections formed and transmitted over time. The journey material belongs especially to the Book of the Watchers, First Enoch 1 through 36. Within that section, chapters 17 through 19 describe Enoch crossing extraordinary regions under angelic guidance, while chapter 22 presents a mountain containing separated chambers for the dead. So the source is ancient, but its route is not preserved like an itinerary scratched onto a Roman road map. It belongs to a cosmology in which geography, judgment, and revelation overlap. And that distinction becomes especially crucial for this investigation. When Enoch reaches the first boundary, no ordinary traveler is said to cross. The boundary is described most clearly when Enoch is taken beyond the inhabited world and shown places associated with cosmic punishment. In 1 Enoch 18, the text states that he sees the treasuries of the winds, the foundations of the earth, and a region where 7 stars are bound. The scene is not presented as an ordinary landscape. It is a structured edge of creation. Then the description becomes more concrete. Enoch sees a place of great darkness, with a deep abyss, and fiery columns or mountains rising around it. In chapter 19, the angel Uriel explains that this region is connected with rebellious heavenly beings who transgress the divine order. The text is describing a destination with function. It is not simply far away. It is a place of confinement. That matters because the journey has direction, sequence, and restricted access. Some scholars interpret these passages as part of an ancient Jewish cosmography, a way of imagining the ordered universe through mountains, winds, heavenly storehouses, and boundaries between realms. The language resembles geography because geography was one of the tools available for making invisible order imaginable. But the evidence does not establish that the author intended readers to locate these sites on a physical map. The route also depends on who is traveling. Enoch is not portrayed as an explorer using landmarks to reach a hidden settlement. He is escorted by angels. He is shown what lies beyond normal human perception because revelation, not navigation, grants access. That makes the title's phrase reveals the way in both true and misleading. The way in is described, but not as a path available to anyone who knows the coordinates. And then another detail complicates the picture. Later in the same journey cycle, Enoch reaches places connected not with imprisoned angels, but with the dead. If the earlier passages describe cosmic boundaries, chapter 22 appears to place human souls inside a mountain with separate chambers. The text has shifted from the edge of creation to the fate of ordinary humanity. So, are these two locations part of one continuous world, or are they different visionary spaces joined only by Enoch's guided journey? The human destination appears in 1 Enoch 22, where Enoch is shown a great mountain of hard rock containing hollow places within it. The text states that these chambers are prepared for the spirits of the dead until the day of judgment. They are not all the same. Different groups are separated according to their condition and fate. The scene is striking because it gives the dead a location. Enoch asks why the hollow places have been divided. The angel Raphael explains their purpose. One chamber holds the spirit of Abel, whose voice continues to accuse Cain. Other compartments are assigned to different categories of the dead as they await judgment. The text presents this as an ordered holding place, not as the final destination of humanity. That is an important distinction. The mountain is not described as a secret refuge for living people, nor does Enoch enter it by following a road from a named city. He reaches it only during the same supernatural journey that carries him beyond ordinary human boundaries. Yet the geography is more specific than a simple statement that the dead are somewhere else. There is a mountain, interior spaces, separation, waiting, and an angelic explanation of what each space means. Some scholars understand this imagery against broader Second Temple Jewish ideas about the fate of the dead, judgment, and the organization of the unseen world. The precise relationship between 1 Enoch 22 and later Jewish or Christian concepts of the afterlife remains debated. Similarity does not establish direct dependence. But one feature is difficult to ignore. The text imagines the unseen as structured space. That changes the question. The hidden world in Enoch is not one place. It is a network of restricted zones with different purposes, reached through revelation, governed by judgment, and guarded by a cosmic order. And once that pattern is visible, a more unsettling possibility appears. If Enoch's journey is organized by thresholds, then one small detail in the wording may determine whether those thresholds are symbolic, geographical, or both. One small detail sits inside the mountain scene itself, the way the chambers are distinguished. In 1 Enoch 22, the surviving textual traditions do not present the description in exactly the same form. The Ethiopic text speaks of several hollow places prepared for the spirits of the dead, while the Greek witness from Akhmim preserves wording that has long required comparison and reconstruction. Scholars have debated the precise number and arrangement of the compartments because the textual evidence is not perfectly uniform. That sounds minor, but the implication is large. If the chambers are being described as a fixed architecture, then differences in number or wording affect how literally we should reconstruct the scene. Are we dealing with a precise cosmic map, or with a visionary description transmitted through manuscripts that do not preserve every detail identically? The text itself is clear on the larger point. The dead are separated while awaiting judgment. What remains less certain is the exact spatial scheme. A damaged or divergent reading cannot be treated as a hidden code revealing a physical entrance. The manuscript evidence does not justify that claim. And there is another problem. Ancient cosmological language often uses concrete spatial terms for realities that are not accessible in ordinary geography. Mountains, pits, gates, chambers, and boundaries can function as real locations within the world of the text without corresponding to coordinates a traveler could reach. That does not make the imagery meaningless. It makes the threshold harder to classify. The hidden detail, then, is not a secret password. It is textual instability at the very point where modern readers most want precision. And if the manuscripts themselves resist a single architectural reconstruction, what kind of evidence could ever tell us whether Enoch's way in was meant as geography at all? That question leads away from ancient geography and into a modern laboratory problem: how scholars reconstruct a text that survives in different languages, fragments, and copies. Today, the way into Enoch's hidden world is not an excavation tunnel. It is textual criticism. Researchers compare the Ethiopic manuscripts with surviving Greek passages and the Aramaic fragments from Qumran. They study spelling, word order, repeated phrases, scribal mistakes, and places where one textual tradition preserves material differently from another. Paleography helps estimate the age of manuscripts through handwriting styles. Multispectral imaging can sometimes make faded ink more legible on damaged fragments by recording wavelengths beyond ordinary visible light. None of this proves that Enoch's mountains or chambers existed physically. What it can do is test a different question: how early particular descriptions were circulating, and how stable they remained as the work moved across languages and centuries. That distinction is crucial. If an image appears only in a late copy, scholars must ask whether it entered the tradition later. If related wording can be traced into much earlier witnesses, then the imagery itself is demonstrably older, even though its geography remains unverified. The Qumran fragments therefore function less like coordinates and more like timestamps. They show that Enochic traditions were already being copied in Aramaic before the Common Era. Greek and Ethiopic witnesses then reveal parts of the later transmission history. Modern technology sharpens the text, not the landscape. That is a powerful limit. The physical fragments can establish transmission, antiquity, and wording. They cannot establish that a mountain of the dead or a cosmic prison corresponds to a discoverable location on Earth. A camera may recover letters invisible to the eye. A paleographer may narrow a manuscript's probable date. A textual critic may identify where versions diverge. But no imaging technique can turn visionary cosmography into archaeological proof. Still, this modern reconstruction creates a historical problem of its own. If these descriptions were ancient, copied, translated, and preserved across communities for centuries, how did later Jewish and Christian traditions decide what authority, if any, such a map of the unseen world should possess? That question was never answered uniformly. At Qumran, Enochic writings were copied alongside many other Jewish texts, but the mere presence of a work in the caves does not prove that every group regarded it as scripture. What the manuscripts establish is circulation, preservation, and importance within at least some Second Temple Jewish settings. Early Christianity complicates the picture. The New Testament letter of Jude, verses 14 and 15, contains language closely corresponding to 1 Enoch 1:9, and explicitly attributes the saying to Enoch. That is strong evidence that an Enochic tradition was known to the author of Jude. It does not by itself prove that the entire Book of Enoch held canonical status for all Christians. Some early Christian writers treated Enoch with considerable respect. Tertullian, writing around the beginning of the 3rd century, defended the book's value even while acknowledging that it was not received by everyone. Other Christian traditions were more cautious. Over time, First Enoch disappeared from the biblical canons used by most churches and survived only partially in Greek and other languages. But it was not lost everywhere. In Ethiopia, the work was preserved in Ge'ez and remained within the scriptural tradition of the Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church. That preservation is the reason a complete form of First Enoch survived into the modern period when European scholars encountered Ethiopic manuscripts. This history creates a genuine conflict, but not a simple story of suppression. Different communities transmitted different collections, used different criteria, and inherited different textual traditions. No single council can be shown to have removed First Enoch from a universal Bible, and the evidence does not support the claim that the Council of Nicaea banned it. What survived then depended not only on theology but on language, geography, copying, and community memory. And that leaves the central mystery sharper than before if one tradition preserved Enoch's hidden geography as scripture, while others did not. Was the disagreement really about the map itself, or about what kind of historical authority the book was allowed to claim? The authority question leads directly into the present, because one part of the evidence is still incomplete. No complete Aramaic copy of 1st Enoch has been recovered from Qumran. What survives are fragments, sometimes preserving only portions of lines. That means scholars can compare ancient Aramaic witnesses with later Greek and Ethiopic forms, but they cannot reconstruct every passage with equal confidence. In some places, the earliest wording is secure. In others, the surviving evidence leaves gaps. For the geography of Enoch's journeys, those gaps matter. A modern reader may want to ask whether a particular mountain, chamber, gate, or boundary can be traced back word for word to the oldest recoverable form of the text. Sometimes the answer is yes in substance. Sometimes the relevant passage survives only in later witnesses, or survives incompletely in the Aramaic material. The absence of a fragment does not prove that a passage was invented later. It only limits what the physical evidence can demonstrate. That creates a problem no excavation has solved. The Book of Enoch presents a coherent pattern of restricted places, guided access, and cosmic boundaries. The manuscript record confirms that major Enochic traditions are ancient, but the surviving fragments do not preserve a complete ancient map that can be laid beside the later Ethiopic text and checked line by line. So the mystery today is not whether scholars possess the book. They do. It is how closely the surviving forms preserve the spatial details that first gave the journeys their architecture. And until another early witness appears, one question still remains open: are the missing details merely accidents of preservation? Or could some of the features modern readers treat as a precise route belong to later stages of transmission? That possibility is exactly where the investigation has to slow down. Now, an important distinction is necessary. The physical evidence consists of manuscripts and fragments. Those objects prove that Enochic writings circulated in antiquity, including Aramaic copies from Qumran. They show age, transmission, and textual continuity in parts of the work. They do not prove that the mountains, chambers, prisons, or boundaries described in the text exist as physical locations. The textual evidence is different. The Book of Enoch states that Enoch is guided through ordered regions associated with winds, stars, rebellious angels, the dead, judgment, and the limits of creation. Within the narrative, these places are real, but a text can describe a real place within its own cosmology without giving modern archaeology a location to excavate. Interpretation comes next. Some scholars understand these journeys as ancient Jewish cosmography, using spatial language to express how the universe is structured and how divine judgment operates. Others emphasize the visionary character of the journeys. Neither interpretation turns the account into a modern geographic survey. Then there is speculation. The idea that Enoch preserves directions to a hidden terrestrial world is possible only if several assumptions are added that the surviving evidence does not establish. We would have to assume that the journey language is primarily geographic, that later textual transmission preserved the relevant spatial details accurately, and that angelic guidance encodes a route humans could reproduce without revelation. If the geography is intended literally, and if the surviving descriptions preserve that geography closely enough, then the larger question becomes whether Enoch's hidden world belongs somewhere within the physical earth or to a larger ancient model of reality in which earth, underworld, and heaven form connected regions. That is the strongest implication the evidence allows without crossing into invention. The manuscripts give us an ancient text. The text gives us thresholds. The interpretations explain why those thresholds might matter, but none of them gives us coordinates. And that leaves one final problem. If the Book of Enoch never provides ordinary access, why does its journey read with such persistent spatial precision at all? Back in the dry darkness of Qumran Cave 4, the surviving fragments still look almost painfully ordinary. Torn parchment, faded ink, broken lines in Aramaic. Nothing in their physical appearance reveals mountains of the dead, prisons for rebellious beings, or boundaries at the edge of creation. And yet those fragments matter because they anchor Enoch's strange journeys in antiquity. They show that these traditions were being copied long before medieval Europe encountered the book through Ethiopic manuscripts. The physical evidence is real. The hidden world remains a matter of text, interpretation, and belief. That may be the final tension. The Book of Enoch does describe entrances, chambers, distant regions, and restricted zones. It also describes how Enoch reaches them, but the way in is never reduced to coordinates, roads, or a route an ordinary traveler can follow. Access comes through revelation and angelic guidance. The cave gives us no doorway, only fragments. And those fragments preserve a map whose status is still unresolved, part cosmology, part vision. Perhaps understood literally by some ancient readers, but never confirmed by archaeology as a discoverable hidden world. So when Enoch crossed those boundaries, was he traveling through geography, through vision, or through an ancient universe in which the difference did not yet exist?